Hello, everyone. If you are joining, we're going to give it just a minute to let people log in and make sure that their audio is working and all that. So hang tight for just a second. I see that we have some people rolling in. Welcome, everyone. Just a reminder that you are in listen-only mode for the live webinar. So hopefully you can hear us clearly with your speakers or your headphones. And there is an audio button on the bottom of the screen that you can check. But if you're having any issues, please let us know in the chat. We have Samantha here to help. All right, and then Samantha also put in a icebreaker question. So this is probably one that people have very strong opinions about. When you're on an airplane, do you prefer the window seat or the aisle seat when traveling? For me, I like the window seat if it's early or late and I'm going to disassociate through the flight. And if it's any other time of day, I want an aisle seat so I have control. If I would love to hear any middle seat people, but Bree, what do you think?
I personally prefer an aisle seat. I'm pretty tall, so I really like to have the aisle to put my legs in, and I hate when I'm stuck behind somebody who like reclines on top of my legs. And so I prefer the aisle seat. What about you, Lissa?
I think mine is also context dependent. If I have a really short layover, I'm always trying to get the aisle so that I can dash to the next flight.
It's interesting. I'm actually surprised how many window people we have. Sandra says window, even though I fly often. I'm a nervous flyer, and seeing out the window helps her stay calm. Less stress. Yep,
Right,
whichever seat
exactly,
causes
Vicky.
less stress. Yep, it is so hard to know. All right. Well, I'm glad to see that people are rolling in and they are using the chat. We will be using that throughout the webinar. And so with that, I think we'll go ahead and get started with our webinar, from search to selection, finding the right evaluator to your ATE grants. The webinar is brought to you by Evaluate, the evaluation hub for the Advanced Technological Education Program. Evaluate works towards an AT community in which evaluation is valued, systematic, and used to improve the education of technicians in high-tech fields. You might be familiar with our work. We do this through engaging project leaders and evaluators with information, expertise, and tools to advance high quality evaluation. Whether you've been in the AT community or you're hoping to gain an AT grant, we're here to support. The slides from this webinar are already on Evaluate's website, along with several other resources. You may download these resources by following the links on the right side of your screen, and the recording will also be available within a couple of days that will be emailed to you. So please feel free to share this out and view it as it's useful in the future. I'm Megan Lopez. I'm going to be the moderator for today's webinar, and I'm joined by Brianna Hook Singletary and Lissa Wilson Betcho, who are our presenters today. They're both part of the Evaluate team, which is located at the Evaluation Center at Western Michigan University. We'd also like to recognize those who have worked behind the scenes to help bring this webinar to you today, including Samantha Hooker, who you'll see in the chat, helping with technical support, and Maureen Green from the Evaluate team, who has provided tons of support getting this ready today. We also want to thank Billy Copley from the Micro Nanotechnology Education Center and George Chiodo from Tennessee Tech University for their input in making this webinar and supporting content. This webinar is designed for individuals funded by the National Science Foundation's ATE program, or Advanced Technological Education Program. The ATE program is focused on improving technician education mainly through two-year colleges. It funds projects in high-tech areas like advanced manufacturing, engineering technology, IT, nanotechnologies, and so on. However, we're going to talk about many aspects related to evaluation that are applicable to broader areas than just ATE or even STEM education programs. So if you're not part of the ATE program, thank you for being here. We think you'll find it relevant. And before we get started, I want to point out that the views expressed in this webinar are those of the presenters and do not necessarily reflect the views of the National Science Foundation. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Brianna.
Thank you, Megan, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thanks again for joining today for the Evaluate webinar, From Search to Selection, Finding the Right Evaluator for Your ATE Grant. My name is Brianna, and I'm thrilled to be joined today with my colleague Lissa, and together we're going to walk through a really practical session. Whether you're here as a principal investigator trying to figure out who to hire, a grant officer getting ready to submit a proposal, or even an evaluator trying to understand what projects are looking for, you're in the right place. Before we get started, we're going to turn off our cameras so we can stay focused on the content. We'll turn them back on during our question and answer breaks, so you'll get to see us then. Let's go ahead and get moving. To get us grounded, in the ATE solicitation, there is a section on evaluation. There, it clearly states that all ATE-funded projects must include an evaluation. And here's something that's really important. The funds to support an evaluator who is independent of the project must be requested as part of your budget. Your evaluator cannot be someone who already holds another budget line on your grant. They need to be external, truly independent from the work they are evaluating. And I know that can feel a lot, especially if you're early in this process and just trying to figure out where to start. And that's exactly why we're here. So let's take a look at what we have planned for today. And I hope by the time we're done, you'll have a clear path forward. Here's a quick look at what we're going to cover. We'll start with our decision framework for selecting an evaluator. We'll walk you through 4 decision areas that can help you assess whether a candidate is the right fit for your project. Then we'll move into a discussion of where to search for an evaluator, because you can't evaluate candidates if you don't know where to find them. We've also built in 2 question and answer breaks throughout the session, so you'll have chances to ask questions as we go, not just at the end. Please, however, feel free to use the chat throughout the presentation, and we will try our best to answer those questions during our breaks too. And we'll close with some action planning time, so you'll leave today with something concrete in hand. Before we dive in, it's helpful for us to get to know the general makeup of our audience today. You should see a poll question appear on the right-hand side of your screen. Using the response options, please let us know what best characterizes your current relationship to evaluation. Are you a recently funded project looking to hire an evaluator? Are you developing a grant proposal? Are you an evaluator looking to connect with clients? And if none of these feel right, please expand in the chat box. So it looks like we have responses from most of our audience, I think, and it seems like many of you guys are evaluators. However, we do have a few people developing a proposal and who are recently funded, with a few who say there's an option that's not listed. Let's see if I can see. All right. So no matter your role or what stage you're in, we've included relevant content for everyone in today's webinar. Anything we don't answer, please type in the chat box and Megan will flag it as a question and bring it back during one of our question and answer breaks. Speaking of the chat box, let's warm up your fingers. First, we want to hear from project teams or grant seekers who are with us today. What is the biggest consideration for your project when looking to hire an evaluator? cost. Yep, that is a big factor. Thank you for responding, Paul. All right. Okay, let's give evaluators an opportunity since there's a lot of them in the audience today. It's your turn. What do you wish was project's biggest consideration when looking to hire an evaluator? Fit, evaluation expertise. Yep. Quality fit. Yes. All right. So let's dig into selecting an evaluator. How do you know who is qualified? This is one thing that trips up a lot of people because qualified can mean a lot of different things. Someone might have a research background, someone else might have years of consulting experience, another person might have an evaluation certificate, and sometimes you end up with a short list of names and no real way to compare them. That's where a lot of projects get stuck because knowing someone's credentials is only part of it. The real question is whether they're the right person for your specific project. And that comes down to fit. So what do we mean by fit? Fit isn't just about credentials. It's about the right combination of credentials, context, approach, and relationship. An evaluator who checks every box on paper, but has a very different vision for what your evaluation should look like, that's a mismatch. An evaluator who has relevant experience, but can't communicate clearly with your team, that may create friction. So to help you think through fit across all of these dimensions, we've put together a framework with 4 areas to consider. Let's take a look. The framework moves through 4 areas. First, basic qualifications. Does this person meet the threshold to even be considered? Think of this as your starting point. Second, contextual fit. Does this person understand your world? Not just evaluation in general, but the specific context your project lives in. Third, approach to evaluation. Is the way they do evaluation actually a match for your project? This is about how they think, what methods they use, and how they engage with the project team. And fourth, partnership potential. Can you actually work well with this person? Because this is a relationship that will last the life of your project. Now, I want to be clear, no evaluator is going to be a perfect 10 across all 4 areas. You're not looking for someone who checks every single box. You're looking for the best overall fit. And that means weighing these areas together rather than expecting any one candidate to be flawless on all of them. Let's walk through each one. We're going to start with the first area, basic qualifications. Think of this as your foundation. These are the core things you want to see before you go deeper with any candidate. First, does this person have relevant education or training in evaluation? This might look like a graduate degree program in program evaluation or a related field, a certificate, or meaningful professional development. The key word is relevant. You're looking for someone whose training is actually grounded in evaluation, not just general research. Second, have they conducted program evaluation? You want someone who has worked alongside a project team to look at implementation, outcomes, and how findings get used. That hands-on experience is what you're looking for. Third, can they serve as an external evaluator? For ATE, independence is essential. You want someone who is fully dedicated to the evaluation role, not wearing multiple hats on the same project. And fourth, are they available within your project timeline? Finding someone whose availability lines up with your needs is part of finding the right fit. As you're thinking through these, keep in mind that it is about getting a sense of the overall picture. You're looking for someone who brings a strong foundation to the table. The second area is contextual fit, and this is where it gets more specific to ATE. Someone can have a solid evaluation background and still not be the right fit. if they've never worked in contexts like yours. And I want to say again that candidates won't always have everything here, and that's okay. What you're looking for is a strong overall picture. So what does contextual fit look like? You want someone who has experience evaluating STEM education, workforce development, or community college programs. These aren't generic educational settings. They come with their own culture, their own language, and their own set of outcomes that matter. You also want someone who either knows the ATE community or is genuinely willing to learn it. And I want to sit with that second part for a second. You do not need someone who has evaluated 10 ATE grants, but you do need someone who will take the time to understand what this program is, how it works, and what NSF expects. Ideally, they've worked with federal grants before and understand what reporting to a federal sponsor looks like. And last, can they communicate accessibly with the range of people on your project? Your evaluator is going to interact with students, faculty, industry partners, and administrators. You want someone who can meet people where they are. The third area is approach to evaluation. And honestly, this is the one I find most interesting because it gets at things that don't show up on a resume, but really determine whether your evaluation is actually going to be useful. Start by asking, does the way this person does evaluation align with your project's goals and values? This is a really important question. Think about what's at the core of your project, your priorities, the communities you serve, the outcomes you care about most. You want an evaluator whose approach reflects those things. If your project is deeply rooted in community partnerships, are they collaborative by nature? These things need to line up. Ask to see examples of their prior work, not just a list of projects, but actual work. How did they design their evaluations? How did they engage with the project team? What did a report look like? That will tell you a lot. You also want someone who adapts their evaluation design to your specific context, rather than applying the same template to every project they take on. And then ask directly, do they help projects actually use their findings? Because the whole point of evaluation is learning and improvement, not just receiving a report and never hearing from someone again. The fourth area is partnership potential. And this is one that often gets overlooked or deprioritized in the search process. But I want to make the case that it matters just as much as the others. You're going to be in a working relationship with this person for the life of your grant. How you work together is going to shape the entire evaluation experience. So what are you paying attention to here? First, how do they communicate during the selection process itself? Are they responsive? Are their emails clear and organized? Because what you see right now is typically what you get. If they're hard to reach before they're hired, that pattern usually continues. Second, do they ask good questions about your project? Not just about scope and budget, but about your goals, your participants, what success actually looks like for you. A good evaluator is genuinely curious. Third, do they show real interest in your project and the people it serves? You can usually feel when that's authentic versus when someone is just trying to win the contract. And finally, are they being honest about their capacity? An evaluator who tells you upfront that they're at capacity right now is worth more than one who overpromises and underdelivers. Now we're going to put this framework to work with some practical scenarios. Take a look at Evaluator A, Dr. Marcus Webb. Dr. Webb has 15 years of experience in education research and program evaluation. He has worked with K-12 schools, community colleges, and workforce development programs. His evaluations typically include surveys and interviews. He is familiar with NSF reporting requirements and is excited to work with ATE projects. Using the framework as your lens, I want you to think about two things and share them in the chat. What are some things you would consider an asset about Dr. Webb? And what are some things you might want to explore further? Take a minute and drop your thoughts in the chat. All right. Well, some of the assets that are coming up to me include his community college and workforce development experience, his familiarity with NSF and his breadth. Some of the things that I think are worth exploring further are what methods does he use beyond surveys and interviews? Does he work collaboratively with project teams, or does he hand off a report? And what does excited actually translate to in terms of ATE specific knowledge? These are some of the questions that the second and third area of our framework push you to ask. And now I see your responses in the chat, so thank you all for responding. But we'll have an opportunity to do it a couple more times. So let's take a look at our second candidate, Dr. Sandra Adeyemi. Dr. Adeyemi holds a PhD in evaluation studies and has 20 years of experience evaluating federal programs, including Head Start, Title IV, and STEM education initiatives. She leads a team of 5 evaluators and has published extensively in peer-reviewed journals. She looks forward to bringing her rigorous approach to your project. Same 2 questions. What are the assets here, and what might she want to explore further? Go ahead and put your thoughts in the chat. Knowledge of evaluation. Thank you, Jen. Experience. Thank you, Richard. I see Katie mentioned who from her team will actually do the lion's share of the work. That is definitely something worth exploring. I love the range of perspectives. I wish I could read them all, but I'm just going to keep moving for right now. So some clear assets include the program experience, as you guys mentioned. She seems to have a dedicated evaluation team, a strong publication record, which typically signals some type of methodological rigor. But there are also some things worth digging into. When she says rigorous approach, what does that mean in practice? Is it adaptable to a community college grant with a smaller team? Somebody mentioned, is her team of 5 the right fit for your project scope and budget? We don't know much about them. And has she worked within the ATE context specifically, which can be quite distinct from Head Start or Title IV? So these are the kinds of questions the second and third areas of our framework are designed to surface. And so we have one last candidate to look at. Evaluator C, Dr. Yolanda Ferris. Dr. Ferris is a quantitative researcher with expertise in experimental and quasi-experimental design. She has evaluated 5 STEM programs at R1 universities using randomized controlled trials and large-scale surveys. She's interested in expanding into community college settings. So again, the same 2 questions. What are the assets, and what might you want to explore further? Yep, their experience with qualitative research. Those may be skills that are important for your ATE project. Research experience. Great quantitative skills. I see Christy mentioned, but mixed methods works best for these type of grants. They're coming in really fast. I see that Vicki said experience with NSF, especially ATE. We may want to explore that. Richard mentioned that she needs qualitative for this type of project. So again, the quantitative rigor, like many of you guys may be thinking, may be impressive, but RCTs, quasi-experimental design, large-scale surveys, most ATE projects do not have the size or infrastructure to support that level of methodological complexity. So it's worth asking, honestly, whether her approach matches the scale of your project. But here's where the second and third areas of our framework really sharpen the picture. Her experience is all at R1 universities, research-intensive institutions with large student populations and robust data systems. Community colleges operate very differently, smaller sample sizes, different relationships with institutional data, different cultures around research participation. Is she really prepared for that? And although she says she's interested in expanding into community college settings, which is honest and something I actually appreciate, that also means that your project may become the context in which she is learning. Is that a trade-off that your project can absorb? These are exactly the types of questions the framework is designed to help you think through. Now I'm going to hand it over to Megan for our first.
All right. Thank you so much. We did get a question from Jen, but at this point, put any questions that you might have in the chat, and we're going to spend some time answering. But the first question we have from Jen is, are there specific certifications or licensing for evaluators? I also saw that Sandra in the chat wrote that she was lucky enough to get her PhD in program evaluation, assessment and measurement. There are several PhD and master's programs around the US. However, a person does not need to have an advanced degree in program evaluation to do great work. Bree, do you have anything else to add to that question?
No, I appreciate the responses to Jen's question in the chat. What was already mentioned, there's no real credential for evaluators in the US. So the title evaluator alone doesn't guarantee qualification. However, a lot of evaluators do hold PhDs in evaluation, social science, or education research. And some may pursue credentials in other countries like the Credentialed Evaluator, which is in the Canadian Evaluation Society. But none of these are legally required to practice in the US.
And as a follow-up question, Jen asks, are there qualifications that NSF is looking for with their evaluator in an NSF proposal?
Well, the NSF doesn't really require credentials, but they expect the proposal to make the case that the evaluator is the right fit for the project. So most briefly describe the evaluator's qualifications, including their experiences in STEM education. And at minimum, there's some background in basic social science and educational research skills, along with some preparation to conduct evaluation.
I would add to that when you are submitting an ATE proposal, not only are the NSF program officers looking at that and looking at your justification of the fit of the evaluator, but also the reviewers, right? So think about how you are making that argument to say, this is the right person who will help us succeed. So whatever you feel like is helpful in order to make that argument is helpful.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we have another question from Amy, specifically focusing on the difference between what makes an evaluator versus a researcher. Amy said, I guess I don't really understand between or what the difference is between them. Could you explain that further? Lisa, do you mind answering that?
Yeah, so I know earlier Brianna said make sure that this person has experience in evaluation, not just research and assessment. And I think those three things often get all mixed together. And I will certainly acknowledge that all of those things really share a similar skill set, right? So when we talk about how to collect data, right, how to do surveys or interviews, and even the analysis portions. But there are really valuable skills that program evaluators bring to the table that you want to look for. So evaluators who are really experienced and skilled in asking evaluative questions that can help you really interpret that data, bringing it from just 100 students, as you're finding, okay, what about those 100 students, right? Do we know if that's good or bad? An evaluator can help bring in a variety of tools and strategies that helps you compare that 100 to either maybe a national benchmark, maybe it's a similar program, maybe it's your program goal. There are a lot of ways to bring in those evaluative conclusions and judgments, and someone who has that specific experience as an evaluator will be able to do that which with much more skill and nuance, I think, than someone who has only traditionally engaged in research or assessment.
All right. We have one follow-up question from Amy. And then if you have any other questions, please continue to put them in the chat. We will make sure we answer them by the end. But Amy's second question is, where might an evaluator learn more about the ATE program?
I can go ahead and answer that. A few solid starting points, maybe looking at the ATE program solicitation. And also on the Evaluate website, there's several guides, newsletters, and webinars that can help you learn more about the ATE community. Specifically, we do have some targeted for people who evaluation essentials to learn more about ATE there.
Yeah, I would also add that ATE Central has a really great reference guide. They call ATE 101, Getting Started, gives a good overview of things. And this is actually a space that Evaluate is working into building out as well. So stay tuned for exciting things to come.
All right. With that, we'll pass it back to Lissa.
All right, so we are going to have one more question break at the end. So remember, if you have any questions along the way, feel free to add them into the chat. All right, so now that we have a sense of what we might be looking for in an evaluator, let's talk about how to find one. So the first step in understanding, the first step in finding an evaluator is really understanding your institution's procurement policies. So procurement policies are the official rules of an institution that they have to follow when purchasing goods or services. And this includes when hiring an external contractor. Every institution has different rules that often affect hiring evaluators. These rules really exist for a good reason. They can help you find someone that is qualified and at a fair price. Think of competitive procurement like a farmer's market. You can walk the aisles, compare vendors, and pick what fits your needs. But evaluators aren't produce. Unlike tomatoes, you can't always tell quality at a glance. And that's exactly why these policies sometimes make hiring an evaluator feel more complicated than it should. So to learn about your institution's specific rules, reach out to your procurement's office. This office goes by different names depending on where you work. You might know it as a purchasing office, maybe a contracts and procurement office, maybe a purchasing and contracts office. Smaller institutions may not even have a dedicated procurement office. So in that case, we would suggest trying your Office of Grants and Contracts, Sponsored Program Office, or maybe even just the business office. If you're still not sure where to start, ask your grants administrator or whoever manages your grants budget at your institution. They'll be able to point you in the right direction. So once you've found the right person, or at least a starting place, here are the key questions you want to ask. Does our institution require a competitive procurement for professional services? And what's our dollar threshold for requiring competitive bid? So many institutions waive competitive bidding under a certain dollar amount. At my institution, for example, that threshold is $5,000. Yours might be $10,000, $25,000, or something else entirely. There's really no universal number, so it's worth confirming. If your institution requires a competitive procurement, but you already have an evaluator in mind, you already know someone you want to work with, you may be able to request a sole source justification. This is a written case explaining why this particular evaluator is uniquely qualified and why a competitive bidding process isn't necessary or practical. The bar here is higher than "we like working with them" or "we've used them before." You'll really need to show this evaluator offers something specific that the market can't reasonably provide through competition. This might be a specialized expertise in a niche evaluation method, or even a deep institutional knowledge from years of being embedded in your project that a new evaluator couldn't replicate quickly. The answers to these questions will outline one of two basic paths. In path one, no competitive bidding process is required. So maybe you are under the threshold, maybe you have an approved sole source justification, or maybe your institution just simply doesn't require it. If so, you're free to start searching for an evaluator that fits your project's needs. In path two, a competitive process is required. This is also known as going to bid or to put out an RFP. So your procurement's office will be able to support you through this process. Let's walk through both of these paths in more details. But first, a quick poll question. So for those of you in attendance today, want to know, do you know your institutional procurement policy? So perhaps you are not sure yet, and you're going to look into it after this webinar, right? Perhaps you don't have a competitive bidding process at all. Maybe you're able to use a sole source justification, or maybe you're required to go to bid. This question will obviously be easier to answer for those of you who are currently funded or developing a proposal rather than the evaluators who are on board today. So it looks like we have some folks who are not sure yet, some where the competitive bidding process isn't required, some where they can use a sole source justification. You know, I think this is pretty representative actually of just the variety that's out there when it comes to what procurement policy looks like at community colleges. And so you know that no matter what path you're on, you are not alone. So just like I said, every institution's procurement policy looks a little bit different. I wish we could give you just one tidy answer that would apply to everywhere, but hopefully this guide will help you navigate your institution's specific processes. So when you're ready to search for an evaluator, there are several great places to look. Evaluate recently launched a new directory built specifically for ATE and other STEM education projects looking for an evaluator. As of today, the directory includes 54 evaluator profiles, and it's growing. Pretty sure I saw one additional submission this morning, actually. So in each profile, you will find a general overview of the evaluator, their education, their prior experience, evaluating other projects as well as ATE projects, their evaluation-specific skills and certifications, their work philosophy and how they approach evaluation. And some even have attached work samples, things like evaluation reports, instruments, or even blog posts that they've written for Evaluate. So we built this directory with the guidance that we shared with you at the beginning of this webinar. The fact that you should consider not only basic qualifications and an understanding of context and their approach to evaluation, we also integrated pieces of evaluators' personalities. So you'll see that many profiles include more informal, they include a more informal photograph of them. So some you see professional headshots, some you'll see they're off hiking or spending time with their family. You also might see details like their hobbies or what they consider a good evaluation. So there are a lot of evaluators on here. So many great people to consider working with. Another great place to look for an evaluator is the American Evaluation Association directory. So AEA for short is the National Professional Association for Evaluators. Many practicing evaluators are members of this association. Their national directory includes evaluators who work in all kinds of fields, but it does allow you to search by state, by area of expertise, or keyword. So for ATE projects specifically, we recommend trying search terms like STEM education, NSF, or community college to surface evaluators with relevant backgrounds. If you are looking specifically to work with an evaluator local to your area, you might check whether there is an AEA local affiliate group near you. So these regional groups, they often maintain their own directories, which are separate from the national one. And this can sometimes turn up evaluators who aren't listed in that national directory. Once you reach out to an evaluator, there are some basic questions you'll want to ask. Many of these align with the decision framework we discussed earlier, starting with, have you evaluated projects in the community setting? Maybe this isn't obvious from what you've seen from them online. Have you been involved in NSF-funded projects before? How do you approach evaluations? How do you typically engage the project team? How often do you meet with project staff? Do you assist with development of evaluation plans for grant proposals? And what might the evaluation budget look like? These are all appropriate and helpful questions to ask when you're trying to determine whether this evaluator is the right fit for you. We have even more questions that you might consider in our resource called Getting to Know an Evaluator, What You Should Ask. And the link to that is in the bottom corner of this slide. So what if your institution does require a competitive procurement process? First, I would say stay in close communication with your procurement office. They may have templates or specific requirements that you need to follow, and that should always come first. So if you have to go through a competitive bidding process, you'll most likely need to issue an RFP, a request for proposal. So think of the RFP as your call to the universe saying, here's what we're doing and here's what we need. To help connect projects and evaluators, Evaluate maintains an online repository of ATE evaluation RFPs. If you have a live RFP, I hope you consider posting it at evaluate.org. Once it's posted, it's also emailed directly to a growing list of evaluators who've signed up for these notifications. So your call reaches people who are actively looking for ATE work. When you're writing an ATE evaluation RFP, there's some basic information you'll want to include. Starting with the submission guidelines, things like the RFP timeline, the eligibility criteria, and details about the review process. You'll also want to include information about your project, things like the background information about your organization, a description of your project activities, goals, and objectives, maybe a bit about your desired evaluation components or evaluation questions, and your expected deliverables. This background detail will really help evaluators be responsive to your information needs. Your procurement's office should be able to help you with the financial, legal, and technical information that you'll want to include in the RFP. And finally, giving detailed submission instructions can really help to ensure that you get the kinds of bids that you're looking for. Providing things like a specific format, length, and organization structure for that submission content is going to help ensure that the bids you receive include the information you need to make a fair comparison. So beyond the basics, a strong ATE evaluation RFP includes some additional items. First, make sure to include which project track you applied to or are applying to. Each track has different evaluation requirements. You might even consider including the link to the NSF ATE solicitation so evaluators can refer to those specifics. It's also helpful to indicate whether this is your team's first ATE or NSF grant. Evaluators often support project teams in a variety of ways, and this will help them prepare the best way to support you and your team. Some ATE project outcomes rely on student-level data, whether it's data from the registrar's office, student grades, or even test scores. Access to and availability of these data sets can really vary project by project. So it's helpful to give potential evaluators a clear understanding of these data sets and their availability in the RFP. Finally, you might consider pointing to some Evaluate resources. Items like Evaluate's evaluation plan checklist for AT proposals or the evaluation reporting checklist can clarify program-wide expectations. So let's recap. Finding the right evaluator starts with understanding your institution's procurement policies, whether you're free to search on your own or if you need to go through a competitive bid. If you're searching directly, the ATE Evaluator Directory and AEA Directory are great starting points, especially if you use ATE-specific search terms. If you're issuing an RFP, Evaluate's repository connects you to evaluators actively looking for ATE work, and a strong RFP includes both the basics and ATE-specific details, things like your project track or student data availability. Either path gets you to the same goal, a qualified evaluator who's a good fit for your project. So before we turn to our final question break, we want to turn to something, a small action plan, setting out some things that you can do in the next few days. So like I said, before we turn over to our final question break, we want to encourage you to make an action plan for yourself and for your team. So take a minute to grab a piece of paper or open a new Word document, however you kind of want to jot this down. I'll give you a second to find a pen. So we're going to start by writing down 3 things that you're looking for in an evaluator. So 3 things you're looking for in an evaluator. This might be a specific set of skills. maybe experience with surveys or conducting interviews with students. Maybe it's just someone who has an approach to evaluation that's adaptive and flexible. What are the skills, qualifications, or experiences that would make the evaluator the right fit for you in your project? Next, write down 2 strategies you might use to find that evaluator. So perhaps you want to ask colleagues at your institution for recommendations. Maybe you want to check out the AT Evaluator directory. Maybe you want to check out AEA or see if there's a local affiliate near you. So jot down 2 strategies that you'll want to use to find an evaluator. And finally, think about one thing. So identify just one thing that your project is going to do in the next 30 days towards finding an evaluator. So this might be reaching out to your procurement's office or grants administrator. This might be setting up calls with potential evaluators or drafting an evaluation RFP. For our evaluators on the call, you could think about how you want to take the information from this webinar and what you're going to do in order to make yourself more present and available and findable to ATE projects looking for an evaluator. If you're willing to share in the chat, we'd love to hear some of your next steps, some of the things you came up with. But of course, no pressure. Know that Brianna and I would be more than happy to talk through any questions you might have about your project or issues that you face selecting an evaluator. So I'm going to invite Megan to come back on to moderate our final question break.
All right. So we have a question about the evaluator directory. Someone says that this seems like a really great resource. You may have already mentioned this, but if my institution has a pre-approved pool of evaluators to choose from, can they still use the evaluator directory or make use of it? Lisa, do you mind providing some insights?
Yeah, Amy, thank you so much for bringing that up. And I just want to provide a bit of context around that. Some institutions have a list or a pool of evaluators that they've already reached out to, that have already filled out basic qualifications, and that their procurement's office has, quote, pre-approved. And so anyone in that institution getting a grant, whether it's an ATE or another grant, will need to use this list of evaluators as their evaluator. Now, some institutions are more strict about that. I've heard that some institutions, it's next to impossible to get someone who's not on that pre-approved list. But I've heard that some other ones are flexible about it, in terms of you could, if you find someone you really like, drawn to on the directory, you could always connect that evaluator with your grants office, with your procurement's office, and see whether or not that evaluator can get on that list of pre-approved evaluators. I think this is also really interesting idea for evaluators to consider, is looking at the community colleges near you and reaching out to their procurement's office and asking if they have a list of pre-approved evaluators, and if so, how might you get on that list? So thank you, Amy.
Okay, we have another question. Oh, and I just want to point out, so Sandra said in the chat, thank you for mentioning sole source justification. Often folks don't know that that's an option at their community college until they ask. When a tailored evaluation plan along with the program evaluator name are part of a proposal package to NSF, it's greatly helpful. So yeah, that is an awesome option. Okay, another question that we have, do we have to pay an evaluator for their work developing an ATE plan for the RAT proposals? And do we have to work with them after receive funding? That is a really great question. Bree, what do you think?
Sure. So generally, no, you don't have to pay an evaluator for their work developing the evaluation plan. However, it is understood that if they do receive the grant, that they will work with the evaluator during the project. With that being said, you do not have to work with them after you receive funding. Though it often makes sense to work with the same evaluator because they're already acquainted with your project and they know like the goals of the project.
And to connect this question back to Sandra's comment about the sole source justifications, most institutions, if you work with an evaluator, they wrote your evaluation plan in that pre-award phase, you can use a sole source justification to say this person is familiar with what we're doing, they built this plan, they were named in the proposal when it was approved, and that's typically an acceptable reason to have them serve and not have to go through that competitive bidding process. I also want to acknowledge that there are evaluators out there who will ask for payment in that evaluation plan development stage. And a lot of times when I see that, there's also a clear understanding that you don't have to work with them if your grant is awarded, that you are paying them for their time in the development of that plan. And that if in the post-award stage you decide to take that plan and work with another evaluator, but still use the plan, that's perfectly okay because you have compensated them for their time. Right. So just to say, like, I think evaluators go about this differently. And so it's definitely a question you'll want to make sure that you ask upfront and that you just have a clear agreement between you and the evaluator.
Okay. And I'm going to ask Bree this question. I think it bridges both sections quite well. In the unfortunate event that a project starts working with an evaluator and realize that the partnership is not as strong as they had hoped or originally thought, are projects able to fire and find a new evaluator mid-project? This person says, hoping that's not the case, but it always makes them nervous when trying to pick someone at the start of their project.
Yeah. And so ideally, like we discussed earlier, you want to have an evaluator that is a good fit for you, your project and your project's needs. So hopefully that won't happen, but hopefully there's also a basis like open and transparent communication. So you're able to communicate if your needs aren't being met. With that being said, if all of that happens and it's still not working out for your project, there you do not have to stay with your evaluator. The goal is to find somebody that works with you well and is able to fill the needs for your project.
And Sandra added in, I've worked on several project rescues where she came in mid-cycle. I typically tell folks to just let their program officer know, and they send on my NSF BioSketch so that they can, so that Sandra can do the work. And there are many reasons, right, where a partnership might not be able to continue. So that's great to know. Okay. Any other final questions? I'll give it just a moment, but Lissa and Bria are also available via email if you have questions following the webinar that come up.
Absolutely. I think some of this content is one of those, like, you don't know you need it until you need it. So if you find yourself in that position, absolutely feel free to reach out.
And I would love to highlight that it seems like we have some evaluators in the chat who are talking about their experiences, how they work to support evaluation plan development and hope to work with people in the future. So that's there's some great knowledge in the chat as well. So if any more questions come up, please feel free to put them in. We also have a survey that's going to pop up on the bottom left-hand portion of your screen. So please give us feedback. As evaluators, we love to look at the data and use it to improve and ensure high quality webinar experiences in the future. Samantha also put it in the chat. Thank you so much, Samantha. And thank you so much for joining us today. We really look forward to seeing you and serving you in the future. And if you're developing a proposal, we wish you all the best of luck, and please let us know how we can support.